Welcome to the Des Moines Register's editorial board with former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who is running for the Republican nomination for the presidency. I'm Lynn Hicks, opinion editor of the Register, and we'll introduce the editorial board.
I'm Clark Kaufman. I'm an editorial writer here at the Register.
I'm Brian Smith. I'm the engagement editor.
I'm David Shivers, the president and publisher.
Emily Nash, executive editor.
And we always start off by asking, why do you think we should consider endorsing you for the nomination?
Well, first of all, I'd be honored to have your endorsement. It would be meaningful. I hope I will be able to earn it because of my proven record of applying conservative principles in a way that lifted the state up that I got to serve in for 8 years, and that I have detailed plans to fix what I consider to be the mess in Washington, D.C., both its culture as well as the problems that are holding us back. I would hope that you would want to endorse a candidate that was intellectually honest, that had detailed plans, that would stick to their guns as it relates to their beliefs, wouldn't run for cover the minute there's any kind of friction about the views. I don't know what your views are about winning the general election, if that's part of the criteria, but I believe I am best suited to defeat the Democratic nominee because of my proven record. I was governor of a purple state, not dissimilar to Iowa. 500,000 more registered Democrats last time I checked than Republicans. I left as the most conservative reform governor in the country, in the state's history, in modern history at least, with a 67% approval rating. So I applied conservative principles to reform some really big things. Education is the one I'm most known for, but across the spectrum of policy, I challenged the status quo and transformed things for the developmentally disabled, our child welfare system, our drug treatment, the drug strategy we didn't have one, and I got there and we did. Our criminal justice system. I was all in, and we created a world-class business climate. In 7 out of the 8 years, we led the nation in job growth. And I think that practical experience really matters because there are a lot of really good talkers running for president. Sometimes I sit on the debate stage and I listen to them talk. Oh, wow, that's a nice line. Hey, that's quite the turn of the phrase, But at the end of the day, this is not just about talking. It's about doing. And it's about ideas because they have consequence and power. It's not just about, big talk. It's about do you have the leadership skills to take complex challenges, apply whatever principles you believe need to be applied. In my case, it's the principles of limited government, personal responsibility, individual freedom being at the core of our country. Can you make a difference? And my record suggests that I could lead, and that's why I would hope that you would endorse me. And happy to answer any questions about foreign policy as well, because that's a place that I think most Americans are really looking for a steady hand now. And some of the candidates don't appear to have it. Before
we get to that, I want to ask you that your party appears to be in disarray. How do you think you can unite it?
Look, the fracturing of our political process is not just a problem on the right, it's a problem on the left as well. The front-running, odds-on candidate is losing in the first 2 primaries right now. There's a reason. There's a deep disaffection on the left and the right. Our government is mired in the mid-20th century when we're living in the 21st century. The challenges are different. The disruption of life is dramatic. Look at your own newspaper business. It's going through a radical transformation. And the government doesn't appear to have any ability to deal with all this disruption in our lives. And so people are angry on the left and right, and the fracturing process is a natural result of that. How do I unite the Republican Party? Well, first, I'm a real conservative. We're a conservative party. You need to have a nominee that is a conservative in the Conservative Party. No one on that stage has a more proven record of applying consistently conservative principles in a practical way in governing a big complex state. No one. A lot of good talking, but you can add the 3 senators' lifetime bills that have turned into law. If you add them all up, 2 bills become law. Hillary Clinton, 8 years in the United States Senate, how many bills that she sponsored became law? 3. You compare that to my record, and it's a pretty compelling difference. So 1, I'm a conservative that has a proven record. 2, I think naturally our party is going to unite when we get through this process, no matter how crazy or arduous or different it is going to be, when we're organized around defeating whoever the Democratic nominee is. There's a natural tendency to unify. It's been 7 lonely years in exile. People, Republicans can go visit the White House by being outside of it, looking in, through the metal fence. They're not invited there anymore, and you cannot govern without having the presidency in Washington, D.C. So I think just there'll be a sense of unity to win in order to get back into the business of governing.
You raised the issue of gun control before we got started.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you've mentioned that we need to figure out a way of how we identify some of these people with mental health issues long before they feel compelled to take up a gun and kill innocent people, that would be the approach to addressing some of these violent crimes. But I don't know that anybody's ever figured out a way of doing that, and if you do identify those people, we don't have cures for that. So doesn't it make sense to address guns in the equation rather than try to figure out a way to identify these people?
I don't think it makes sense to take away law-abiding citizens' rights embedded in the Constitution. I think you need to focus on who are the people that are committing these crimes.
And what would you do once you identify those?
Sure. Well, first of all, you don't do it by executive order. If in fact there is a broad consensus on the left and right, which I think there is, that mental health issues are important, the federal government role could be to provide more funding for mental health challenges. The issues of mental health are complex. You have privacy issues that need to be looked at. I'm not a lawyer, but you cannot overly protect someone if they're spiraling out of control. There should be some, and whether this is a state or federal issue, kind of depends on the actual proposal. But there's things that could be addressed there to make sure that when people do have a mental health challenge, that it's identified so that they can get help and it be known in a way that protects privacy but also allows for some intervention before it's too late. And then the background check issues related to people with mental illness, there's challenges there as well. There needs to be a more seamless system. I think conservatives, including the NRA, by the way, would be interested in having a conversation about that. This president's first impulse is always to go it alone. And tonight will be another example, my guess. I don't want to prejudge, but if history is any guide, he will eloquently, and he's a gifted speaker, talk about the tragedies of gun violence and the sad fact there'll probably be family members there, and there'll be the empty chair and all of the great symbolism. And then he'll demonize people that don't agree with his approach. How are you going to get that? And then do executive orders that I don't think he has the power to do. So I'd say, look, my impulse is not to demonize people that disagree with me. If I had a first impulse, it's can it be solved at the state level first, which is where I think, look, Iowa's gun challenges are very different than Chicago's. Florida is a pro-gun state. We have 1.5 million concealed weapon permit holders. In Florida, we're comfortable that actually creates safety and security with people that have gone through a background check, gotten training, that have a concealed weapon. Not all 1.5 at any given time are wandering around packing, but it creates security. It's not a question. It's not a threat. The people that commit crimes in our state are violent criminals, not people that are law-abiding citizens. So I think he's missing the opportunity. Whenever there is consensus, he should seize it, and he's not. Sentencing guidelines. There's a lot of people on the right that think we need to change our sentencing guidelines. 50% of people in prison, in federal prison, are there for drug-related crimes. There is a growing movement on the right, it's called Right on Crime, to deal with this. Well, why wouldn't the president, rather than pardon people, why wouldn't he go, if he believes, and I think he does, that we need to change the sentences to adjust it to learning from what's going on over the last 30 years? Change the sentencing guidelines. Go to Congress. The civics classes that we used to take, it was quite natural to President submits a law, finds a sponsor, passes the House, passes the Senate. If it's not the same bill, it goes to conference. They work out the differences, then they present it to the president. He signs it into law. How many times does that happen? I mean, it's so commonplace in every state, and yet it's now like some weird abstract thing to suggest that regular order ways is the way to go in Washington.
So you're not opposed to expanding background checks per se, you're just saying it needs to go through the process and not through executive order? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying, yeah, definitely that I think he's doing something he doesn't have the power. The Constitution has not given him this power, nor has there been delegated authority by the Congress. There's no law that he's using.
What needs to be, I mean, as president, what would you propose then in regards
So,
to that?
As I said, my first impulse is that these laws ought to be driven by states first. If in the case of mental health, there are things that could be done at the federal level to create some consistency so that you could identify people that have truly spiraled out of control and should not have access to guns, then I would certainly consider it for sure.
What are the specifics in the president's executive order that you're opposed to? Because obviously mental health and some other things are part of that.
The so-called gun show loophole, how many people get guns through that so-called loophole? It's infinitesimal. It's a tiny fraction. And to impose this on a one-off seller at a gun show, a person who has a collection and wants to sell one to buy another, you know, that is to license them for the federal law. It would overwhelm the ATF, who I think is responsible for this. It's a solution seeking a problem. It's not the problem. And I would oppose that. I think, I haven't seen the specifics, but in the state of Florida, we already have a law that requires people that have restraining orders to be part of when you do the background check, to be part of the database so that they can't access guns. I think that makes a lot of sense. When you're at the point of a restraining order, the potential for violence is real. And so how that's crafted, there's details, of course, that you work out, but I think in principle that's a good idea. And finding a solution on the mental health issue is a good idea. What I oppose, and I oppose it seriously, this is not just a small point, is the violation of the Constitution. It bothers me. I don't know why it doesn't bother everybody that a president is using powers he doesn't have. Because every time he does it, it makes it harder for the next president to restore our democracy, to make it work.
When do you think it is proper for a president to use executive orders?
When he has the authority, when it's been delegated to him by Congress. I'll give you an example. The DACA and DAPA executive order. This is for the parents of the DREAM Act kids and the DREAM Act kids themselves. We have gridlock. Immigration reform has not been done. You have kids that have been here for many, many years whose parents came illegally. They came as children. They have no nexus to their former country. It's a legitimate issue to have a conversation about and to figure out a way to solve it. So what does he do? Congress doesn't act. So he uses executive power. In this case, in the law, the president has the authority of what's called prosecutorial discretion. That on a case-by-case basis, he has the power to look at a case that may be so compelling that they should be granted a chance to stay. Prosecutorial discretion does not mean 5 million people. And that's in the courts right now. He will lose it. He doesn't care. He wants to make the point. He wants to win the political point. He's creating wedges, and I think there's a lot. Our democracy is really important. I think the next president needs to be more humble about the use of the power, both the Attorney General and the presidency itself. And the next president should decentralize power wherever possible, because we're a bottom-up country, not a top-down country. So I have deep philosophical differences with the president and his use of executive powers. Even when he has it, he overreaches, but that's his prerogative. You got to respect that. But when he doesn't have the authority to do it, I think it shows real disrespect for the greatest document ever created, the blueprint for a country that believes that individual freedom includes being free from an oppressive government.
What are you hoping the Sportsman's Coalition that was announced today is going to do?
Well, it just validates my pro-Second Amendment bona fides. Look, I have an A+ rating from the NRA. I won an award for the six-pack of freedom. That in 1 year I passed 6 pro-gun pieces of legislation, including this one we talked about preserving recreational areas so that hunters and people could hunt and people could fish, that it was no net loss of recreation lands. I think that's the kind of approach that people want. So it's a way to show respect. I'm the only candidate to lay out a Western lands policy. That has not much relevance in Florida, but I can promise you the federal government's ownership of land, the further west you get from here, is a huge problem. And the lack of deference to the states, the lack of maintenance to the national parks, the use of monuments way beyond what has been done before that restricts access to this beautiful country of ours, all those things I think it's important to have an opinion on, and I have.
Well, on that, I'm sorry, but on that issue of the national monuments, I mean, the whole concept of creating these is to provide for access to land that might otherwise be in private hands.
No,
and
these are
inaccessible to the public.
Now, this is federal lands that they are adding further restrictions by creating a monument. So it's limiting access for recreation, for commercial uses, for a variety of different uses. It's already federal land. And the president's used that authority that he has. I'm not suggesting he doesn't, but he's used it very broadly without much input from the states that will be affected by it. So I'm not a supporter of Yucca Mountain, for example, but I mean, if Nevada wanted it, I think it ought to be done in a competitive bid process, that people that get the best deal from varying places that might want to have this storage facility, because there could be a big economic driver for any community. But if the monument process basically restricts access to Yucca Mountain, so it was a strategy to, I'm sure, Harry Reid, kind of a parting gift for his years of service, to assure some protection that the next president wouldn't come back in and try to reopen the Yucca Mountain deal. So it's a restrictive strategy. I'm sure there are positive benefits of it, but all of this, whether it's the how you manage endangered species, how you manage water, the big issues out west as we get further out there is the drought. How do you deal with protected species and how you create water capacity, or firefighting. The Department of Interior has a completely different approach than what most private timber managers would suggest is the appropriate way to protect the forests. There's a lot of stress in the federal-state relationship. The Bundy issue is just a small aberration in a larger, more substantive conversation. So these issues of conservation and recreation, I think, are important.
With regard to some of the unrest that we've seen between police and minorities, if I'm correct, you've indicated that you see a very limited role for the federal government in addressing some of those issues.
Yeah, I do. I think if there's...
Is that your watch?
My watch can't be talking.
It is.
Is it my watch?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I'll call you back. I've never had my bat phone be turned on. That's the coolest thing in the world. I know when it's ringing, but I've never actually used it.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Underutilized iWatch. Where were we?
If that was really important, you could take
No.
it.
You know who that was? That was a guy, it was a 515 area code, so it was a guy I was calling to ask him to support me in the caucuses.
Okay.
So it's very important.
Tell me you had a good excuse.
I'll tell him when I call back.
The federal role in terms of the
Yeah, look.
unrest in the minority community and police departments.
Yeah, so the gun violence in our urban areas is clearly up in most big areas. Police violence in that is a small, tiny part, but it is an important part to restore trust for the police department. So I'm not. What I'm saying is the president has a role to be, a uniter in these regards and to rebuild trust and to participate in that. But I worry that every time there is an instant and it's all videoed in some fashion, not necessarily completely showing the full story. You all see that every day now. You're in the digital world. And then the Justice Department kind of comes in with a quick, we're going to have to investigate. It sends, it furthers the distrust that we need to build. Police need to be community policing. They need to be engaged in the community. And if they feel like that the risk is too high to do it, and that their involvement has, the rewards of service are certainly there, but if they believe that those are lower than the actual risk of doing it and that people don't have their back, then you're going to have serious problems. So I think we need to be more supportive at the local level. The idea of body cameras, and the federal government may be providing some money for it. Tim Scott's got a pretty good idea on that. That's fine. I support that. But I worry that there's a tendency to believe that law enforcement is not doing their job, and 99.9% of the time they are.
Well, but in those cases, the argument against that would be, well, go all the way back to the civil rights era and the federal prosecutors who waded in to bring some level of justice to those cases on through Rodney King and Hurricane Katrina. Do you see a role for the federal government?
I do if there is clear, look, I was at a town hall meeting today, a guy was talking about disability issues, why Trump disparages the disabled, and why he was there supporting me, because I'm a, strong supporter of people with intellectual and physical disabilities. I think they're as valuable in our society as anybody else. So we had this conversation, and yeah, if there's discrimination, overt discrimination, put aside a police officer shooting a black man, because most of the crimes are black on black in the communities, most by far. I mean, a great in the predominantly African American communities, it's black on black crime. The police shootings of unarmed black males, which is what the conversation is about, as I understand it, is very small. So I'm not sure that that's necessarily a civil rights issue, but if it is, yeah, of course the federal government the Justice Department has a right and a responsibility to enforce the law. But I think it's gone beyond that. That's my point.
Obviously, there's been a big conversation around race. What would you do to help improve race relations in the country?
I think, first of all, I think the president had just had a powerful opportunity that he didn't seem to, we got another year, so who knows, maybe there'll be an effort in this regard. But I think he could have played a more significant role. And presidents can play that role. They have the power of convening. They have a power of engaging with diverse groups of people. I love the fact that Obama did the town hall meeting, first one I've ever seen him do. It was controlled and the questions were controlled and all that stuff. That's kind of, I guess, how the president rolls. But the fact that he would engage in a way that brought a broader group of people into trying to understand what the challenges were, that's a good thing for the president to do. And on race, I think that's important. So, look, I'm not a perfect public servant in this regard, but I learned through trial and error how not to do things and how to do it as it relates to race. It is a great challenge in our country. It's so easy to, without trying to open up wounds, it's so easy to create divides. And there are a lot of people in the political process who will pounce on it and don't assume the good, correct motives. I mean, it's a constant struggle. Ultimately, the way to deal with race issues is to make sure that everybody has a sense that the system works for them. This last week, I had a chance to unveil a pretty dramatic departure of the welfare system in this country, and I did it the day before the Kemp Foundation Poverty Conference that Paul Ryan and Tim Scott hosted. And you have now, in our country, stickiness at the ends, which is deeply troubling to me and should be for our whole society, that if you're born poor, it is more likely you will stay poor than any time in modern history. In fact, I would say a kid born in poverty in Des Moines this morning, if we don't change the three things that typically lift people out of poverty, which are work, marriage, and education, if we don't transform that and have our assistance programs reward those three things, that child might never get a job. Because what's happening is that with every additional cost, every additional rule, every additional tax, every additional disruption, you have automation taking more and more of the jobs. And if you can't get an entry-level job, and you don't have a quality education because we've never challenged the system, and you may have a high school degree, but that means you're maybe cutting around ninth grade reading and ninth grade math. That's the reality. You're not going to get a job. I mean, imagine. That's the world we're moving to because of accelerated automation and the innovation that is happening at warp speed. So the world we're in is dramatically different than the world of the war on poverty when it started. We now spend $1 trillion. People are stuck. The communities in many of the low-income communities, this isn't really related to race, it's related to income. They're unsafe. It's hard to start a business. The insurance rates are higher. The workforce has been languishing because our education system and training programs are not designed for people they're stuck in these low-income communities. We have out-of-wedlock birth rates are in poverty or above 50%. No country has ever done this. We're unique to the world in this regard. And we can keep doing what we're doing, or we can demonize people like me that propose a radical departure, because that's what the left does, defaults immediately to, well, you're heartless. Well, how can you defend $1 trillion being spent and 7.5 million people more living in poverty than the day that Barack Obama was inaugurated? Who's for that? How many people are happy about that? Defend that for the status quo. Those families are stuck. And a country will not succeed unless there is the ability for everybody to have a chance to rise up.
So go ahead.
So what are your specific policies around taking on the opportunity gap and rising people out of poverty?
Well, first of all, Jeb2016.com is the place for all wonks to migrate if they're interested in detailed policy proposals, because I got them. In this regard, what we proposed was, A, consolidating the three big programs. You have Medicaid, which I believe ought to be block granted, in a plus CPI kind of fashion back to the states, but we can talk about that too. But the programs that I've suggested of combining are the housing assistance programs. There's quite a few, two big ones. The food stamp program, the SNAP program, and the TANF program, which is the program that replaced AFDC when the last, yeah, which exactly, and it's been a highly successful program, but now there's waivers that make it harder for, there's waivers that do not require work anymore in many of the states. So I would take that money, it totals $130 billion, it's a pretty good sum of money, give it to the states, require them they can't supplant the monies that they're already spending on poverty programs. They have to use this, they can't take away the money through the back door that they're already spending. Use this to create a 21st century program to deal with lifting people out of poverty. Focus on outcomes, not inputs. Let them create their own programs with certain criteria that they have to apply, but the focus would be rewarding marriage, because today, if you're married, you lose benefits, and studies on the left and right suggest that marriage is one of the tools to, two incomes is better than one. Rewarding work and requiring work, which has waned in the last few years, and dealing with education. Providing bonuses for states that reform their education system so people in poverty gain a real quality education, not a piece of paper that says they've graduated, but requires them to spend 2 years remediating their English and math skills because they're not college ready or career ready for that matter. So that is the basic program. As it relates to the earned income tax credit, which is a key element of, I think, of a rise out of poverty program. We've suggested that single filers from 21 to 24, which right now cannot qualify for the EITC, which is where that first rung of the ladder actually exists, that they would qualify, and that we would double the EITC for people that are not married. One of the great challenges of our society is the marginalizing of men that make it harder for them to be functioning, producing, capable of being good dads, capable of providing support. If you're marginalizing them, they can't work. Increasingly, they're in the criminal justice system. There needs to be efforts to provide incentives for them to be purposeful in their lives, and the EITC program is one way to do that. We need criminal justice reform if we're serious about this. I don't know, do you all use Man the Box?
As an employer?
Yeah, you should. I mean, it's worth trying. It's a simple idea that instead of screening at the very beginning of someone's, your application for a job where they're immediately cut off, you give people a chance because maybe they have talents that are, the simple things like that are focused on tearing down the barriers to lift people up rather than creating the highest marginal tax rate in the country is someone who's in poverty trying to get out. Because every dollar of income they earn, they lose, depending on the state, and it's complex because every state's a little different. They could lose more than a dollar for the dollar they earn.
So with the block, help me understand the block granting, because if you look at SNAP, I mean, it responds pretty quickly to downturns in the economy. And then when employment picks up, you do see a response as well.
No.
So there is a gap, I mean, there is a gap there. And where's the evidence that a block granting would respond quickly to those people, the safety net factor?
Sure. So the safety net factor, if SNAP snaps up and snaps down based on economic conditions, then why have we gone from 20 million people to 7 million at the peak, and now it's 46?
We haven't exactly, the economy hasn't recovered.
Oh, that's not what Barack Obama is going to say tonight. It's killing it. We're destroying. I mean, it's been a phenomenal ride here. Job growth is occurring. But that's not, that increase is disproportionately out of whack with the economic conditions. And the error rates by the government's own admission are double digits, both on EITC as well as the food stamp program as well as housing assistance. Double digits. In the case of EITC, I think the government said that the error rate was over 20%. So as another element of this, there would have to be a eligibility process. The EITC is a little bit easier. You just have to check people's income, and there is no pre-screening. It's done after the fact, and it's done in a very poor way when you have error rates of over 20%. So I think giving the chance for states to innovate. There's likely to not be one way to provide support for through government to help people be lifted out of poverty. My guess is there's not one way. There could be, I would rather have 30 ways tried, 10 of which fail miserably, learn from it, adjust to it, be more dynamic in the approach. What clearly hasn't worked is what we're doing now. The benefit of applying a little more dramatic change to all of these policies, which is pretty much the hallmark of what I'm advocating across the board, is it's not working. No one can defend the system today. Massive bureaucracies. Look, the state has thousands of employees that respond to thousands of employees in the federal government. They're all chasing, after the fact, compliance issues, paper-driven, extraordinarily inefficient. If you could start today on any of these things, whether it's how you build a road, how you teach a child, how you deliver access to health care, we wouldn't do it the way we're doing it now. I mean, come on. These are vestiges of a time when America was radically different. Our healthcare system was designed with incentives to hire people after the Korean War and World War II. And so we have third-party payers paying for first-dollar insurance costs. There's not as much consumer engagement. If you had a system to start from the beginning, you would empower people to be fully engaged. You'd have total pricing transparency. You would allow innovation to cascade into our lives far faster. This crazy watch, some guy called me, could be used as a tool to wirelessly send a message out to my caregiver that my blood pressure just went up because a liberal asked me a question in a town hall meeting, whatever it is. You'd have a fully technologically advanced, digitized system without paper. You would eliminate the massive amount of fraud that exists or errors. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but we have an inept bureaucracy chasing high cost, chasing a system that was broken a long time ago that hasn't been fixed. And one of the joys of being governor was to be able to get to a position where I could say, if we weren't doing it this way, how would we do it? And actually, not just talk about it, but do it. I think we need that in Washington right now.
I wanted to ask you about energy policy. You suggested the federal government shouldn't be in the process of picking winners and losers.
Right.
And you've even talked about eliminating through tax reform the tax credits that we have for wind, solar, oil, and gas,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. You know, there's one of the arguments that we always hear is that energy independence really does require some involvement by the federal government to promote private investment. How do you respond to that?
I don't think it's necessary. And the winners and losers idea has pretty much been proven, at least by with the stimulus. You know, the Obama administration received a slug of dough. They kind of created a venture capital arm, tried to invest directly in businesses with loans and loan guarantees and direct investments or grants, and they failed miserably. And it failed because market forces were quicker and adapted faster. The hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling just exploded the amount of natural gas supply, lowering prices dramatically, and the whole business model of every one of these deals didn't work. Now, having said that, solar power generation has, per unit of energy produced, has had improvements. It's had reductions, and so has wind. In fact, wind today in Iowa can be done without the wind tax credit. I mean,
So when are you saying that could stop immediately? Or
I think
do you
it should be
have a
phased
time
out. I think it all,
Like over how long?
well, the credit, I don't think you need the credit anymore for the people, you know, for the businesses that have already invested and have fixed investment. You don't change that. That would be a disaster, changing the rules after the fact. But I would phase all this stuff out. The depletion allowance. Why not just simplify the code? We don't need to, the government's impulse shouldn't always be to use the tax code or spending to try to achieve a economic good. That's crony capitalism in many cases. You have to hire a lobbyist. You got to get, you got to get up to D.C. You got to have power. You got to know a congressman who's got a big, was a committee chair, so-called cardinal or something like that. Why not? Don't pick winners and losers. Don't protect the incumbent. Let the market work. I think you'd find that there would be an explosion of innovation in the energy sector, healthcare as well. Health information technology it's at our doorstep. We're on the verge of extraordinary breakthroughs across the board, and it's people pursuing their own dreams. The role of the government, the best place for the government to play in this is in basic research, because that's a place where their scale truly matters. And we have a good record, I think, generally. You could reform NIH for sure, and DARPA and these other agencies that focus on technologies, but reforming it to make it work better is different than trying to engage in social engineering.
So that means you would propose an increase in renewable energy research?
Yeah, but in return, eliminating all these tax credits and all. I think if you want to get to whatever you want to get to, because I couldn't envision what the world looks like. I just know if you create the right kind of frictionless market, you're going to get a faster result to whatever it is. And it might surprise us what that is. But I'm not smart enough, nor is anybody in Washington, D.C. smart enough to decide what that's going to be. I trust some dude in a garage somewhere, banging head, just through good fortune, hard work, genius, whatever it is. It happens all the time in America. We should just assume that Americans haven't lost their desire to disrupt, to innovate, to create, because I think it's still there. I think it's totally part of who we are.
But would you agree that energy independence is a national security issue?
I'd say energy security is a national security issue. I think we should focus on North America. That's why I support the XL pipeline. Sure, it's important. It's like food security. You have to have. There are things that we have to do. We have to have a military that protects us against traditional attack. We need to have cybersecurity that protects us from the 21st century attacks. We need food security, because a nation that, to sustain itself, I think, needs that. And energy security is also part of that. Independence, not sure that's necessary. But helping Mexico reform its energy sector and connect it with ours more than it's already pretty well connected, and certainly Canada would give us a North American superpower status that would help us economically and certainly help us from a national security perspective.
And you do support phasing out the RFS?
In 2023, whenever the law expires, that's when that conversation should take place. And it gets back to this point. I've met a lot of people on the trail that are small investors in an ethanol facility in their community, and it's an important part of that community. And the rules of engagement were established to allow for that investment to take place, and to disrupt that and turn it upside down, I think, would be totally unfair for people that have investing in sunk costs that have to be respected. But I think you send a signal that ultimately ethanol has to be competitive with gasoline, and that the role of the federal government there is to make sure that there's market access, that you're not going to have some part of the distribution system or the retail system that is used to be manipulated to restrict access. If ethanol can be competitive, which it is improving and moving in that direction, then by that time, it should have full market access. There shouldn't be any kind of monopolistic tendencies. Freedom works better than, I got all sorts of great ideas. I wouldn't want to impose them on you.
One of the things that you wrote about, you had a pretty personal essay in the Chicago Tribune the other day about drug abuse, and you talked about different things that need to be done, expanding drug courts, improved substance abuse. Where would you pay for these different initiatives?
They save money. In Florida, we created a forefront strategy. We did fund more treatment monies. They were languishing, though. We were probably behind the national average. But you're saving money if you give people a second chance. You have their adjudication withheld for drug courts. It's a great process. There's a stick there. If you keep falling back and falling down, ultimately the justice process will start up and you'll be convicted of whatever crime you had. Or you have your adjudication withheld where you've had your sentence, but the sentence is to go to drug court. There's a couple of ways of doing this. That saves money because you're not going into prison where it's the most costly place to be. It doesn't save a lot, but it saves some. More importantly, it saves lives. So the question of alcohol and drug addiction is just such a pervasive problem in this country. It's amazing that we don't. People don't seem to be comfortable talking about it that much. But you look, when I ran as governor, I had a strategy. I told myself I have to make this interesting for me. So I'm not going to go just to go fundraisers and raise money for attack ads or whatever. So I wandered around. And one of the things I found that was really extraordinary was to sit in the juvenile justice court with a judge. Call the guy up or gal up and say, they met me. I said, I'm running for governor. I'd kind of be curious to know how you do your job. Can I just sit there with you? And I was like in the child welfare court in Broward County. I sat there for 8 hours or six hours with Kate Carney, who became my secretary of the Department of Children and Families. You see the soft underbelly of American life play out when you go to juvenile justice court and family court. And the political system just totally seems like it's not really relevant. The stuff that we talk about on the debate stage, my God, compared to the problems that families face. So, look, I learned it. I learned it. And I had my daughter was I was governor, in a very public way, went through real challenges. It was hard for her, hard enough to do it anyway, in a private setting for anybody that has to go through this addicted, but doubly more difficult when you're in a very public setting. So I think as a society, we need to deal with this. If you want to allow people to reach their full potential, we got to deal with addiction. One of the places that I do think in terms of long-term investing, we talked about the renewables, energy sector is one. Certainly the NIH is the other. It's a big one. It's been cut back with sequester. And there hasn't been a shift to of thinking about which diseases we should focus on. And someone, I think it was Maria Shriver, sent me an email because I was in a town hall meeting. I advocated focus on Alzheimer's, that we really do need to deal with this. There's so many people I know that have dementia, and the caregivers struggle with this, and it's going to explode into our lives as we all get older. And you take Alzheimer's, you take drug addiction, alcohol addiction, mental health challenges. They're all related to the brain, and we've had the greatest just explosion of extraordinary improvements in healthcare for the physical. You got a pain now, you have the medicines, devices, and trained doctors that would defy our imagination of a generation ago. But the brain, there hasn't been a new drug for Alzheimer's, I don't think, in 15 years. The amount of money spent is not as much as one would expect given the cost to society. And addiction, there's efforts, but they're really on the margins. And I think that needs to be a much higher priority if we're going to create an opportunity kind of society. So all this is driven by policy, impacted by personal experience, and now sharing the tragedies of heroin overdoses, which is now becoming a problem here, and it's certainly an epidemic in New Hampshire. You spend a lot of time with people that are going through this. You can't just ignore it.
You talked about healthcare. Wall Street Journal described your plan for replacing Obamacare as
By far and away the best plan.
broad brushstrokes. No, broad brushstrokes. Is that what's your response to that? Tell
No,
us
it's the most detailed plan. And I saw the Wall Street Journal say that the two plans that have the most details were our plan and Bobby Jindal's plan, but he didn't make it. So there's only one plan left, and it's very detailed as it relates to repealing and replacing Obamacare. And reforming Medicaid and Medicare as well, which is a separate but important subject as it relates to health care. So what we proposed was eliminating the employer mandate, employee mandate, all the mandated benefits, focus on catastrophic coverage, shift this back to the states, a common theme that you're beginning to emerge. I think government in Washington, the most prosperous city in the United States, its power needs to be shifted. It needs to focus on a few things and do it really, really well. And so in the new healthcare exchanges that I think are appropriate, non-mandated coercive exchanges could play a role to provide scale for individuals and small businesses that right now have to pay higher premiums than larger businesses. Just that it's not that complicated, but that's the fact. So in an environment like that, you would say a low premium, high deductible, catastrophic coverage is the basic plan, and you would strive to give everybody peace of mind should there be a catastrophic event, their lives would not be upended. And then how the government plays a role and how the business community plays a role if they want to, if they're not insuring their employees, and how others play a role would then be in a much more open way. It would be done, you could provide co-payment support, you could provide premium support, there's lots of ways to do this, but the basic plan would not be first dollar insurance cost, which is extraordinarily expensive. Insurance was not designed the way we apply it in healthcare. It was designed for that high impact unforeseen event. That's what insurance is for. It works in how for cars and houses and other things. This is not insurance, what we have today. This is a prepayment system, a reimbursement system that's highly inefficient. I think pre-existing conditions is the one big requirement. There should be greater underwriting capability for people. If you're healthy, you don't smoke, you don't eat the kind of foods that lead to bad healthcare outcomes, you live a healthy life, you should not be subsidizing to the degree that healthy people subsidize people that really make bad lifestyle decisions. The dude that smokes a pack a day and drinks a bottle of bourbon should not be treated the same way. That's not you're going to get a pre-existing condition if you do that, but that's not truly a pre-existing condition. A pre-existing condition is your tendencies to get disease because of your DNA. I mean, just, you know, the nature of your, you know, not how you're brought up, but who you are. So that system would be a lower cost system. I think it would be a helpful system to create job growth and greater economic activity. And it would be more mobile and more related to the 21st century. So you'd have portability, you would allow people to buy over state lines, you'd have HSAs that would not just end when you retire, that you'd continue to allow for people to save through health savings accounts for the whatever happens in their lives that would require drawing it down. Much more consumer engagement, in effect. And then modernize the FDA to lower the cost and speed up the process for approvals, both for medical devices and for drugs, and get the FDA to lighten up as it relates to health information technology. The devices that I envision empowering people to make decisions, you know, require big data. They require the FDA is not really designed for the world that we're moving towards, where there's a convergence of devices and software and how you analyze things to be able to, in real time, give patients and caregivers immediate feedback. This is the problem that I think is confronted, at least I see it all the time, which is we're living in a 21st century world. We have a 20th century regulatory system on top of that world, and it looks ugly. There's all sorts of conflicts. I'll give you one quick example. It's maybe too much details, but I think technology really is the solution for so many things, so you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about. There was a device, I met a guy who's building a device that is the size of a grain of sand. And the device is embedded in a pill. And it sends a signal based on your own electric system in your own body of when that pill was ingested. And it sends it out to some device that then goes out to to a big server in the sky, and it immediately determines if you are following the prescription. Because 40% of prescriptions in this country, believe it or not, are misused, and it creates huge adverse health outcomes. So, I mean, that's a pretty cool device. You can imagine the benefits of the cost savings and the health benefits of having a device that could automatically tell you when you're taking the medicine wrong. So FDA approves is, I don't know what the final status of this was like a year ago, but the FDA has to approve that device. And then they came back right at the very end and said, we have to approve the device for every compound that it is connected to, for every pill. There has to be a separate approval. And we want to approve the information technology, the software that is used to really, the driver of the genius of this is the software that then allows it to basically, help people with their healthcare outcomes. I don't think the FDA has the capability of approving a software program. And the delays of this and the costs of this are going to make it harder for the disruptors to be able to get their products to market. And every time we do this, we increase the costs. We have mergers. We end up like having these behemoth pharma companies, and the startups can't start up, and progress is stalled because of the complexity. And so all I'm arguing is, every chance we have, we should start over to try a 21st century solution. And I think that is the better approach. And most of the people seem to be defending the status quo. It just seems like a natural thing to do. Hillary Clinton, her first endorsement is the teachers union, who do a great job protecting the economic interests of their members, the janitors, the food workers, the teachers. But they oppose every reform that tries to shift the power of the system towards kids learning. And on our side, we have similar kind of discussions where we're protecting the incumbents. And I think the impulse ought to be create as free a marketplace as possible and allow the incumbents to compete with the disruptors and see who wins. It's not quite, it's a little more chaotic, it's a little more dynamic, but man, it's a lot more American.
Let's switch gears and talk about your campaign for a couple minutes. You mentioned in the beginning having a high approval rating as governor, but your favorability ratings remain low during this cycle. What do you attribute that to?
I don't know. I'm not a process guy. I don't feel it when people come and see me and when I interact with them, when I show who I am. I acknowledge my belief, my optimism about the future. I think people, I mean, like I've been disparaged, I've been beat up, so no big deal. I got big boy pants on, so that doesn't bother me. Those things change with time. You go earn it. So it doesn't bother me, whatever the numbers are. I want to win. That's kind of the organizing principle here. I'm not trying to make a point. I'm trying to win to fix these things. So,
But when I talk to your supporters here in Iowa, I mean, they're worried about those numbers, and they want to, I mean, their question is, how are you to turn this around in time?
well, we're doing it. We're doing it right now. We're building a great organization. If people are passively supporting me, they're not doing me any favors. I got to get them out on the field. Here's the deal. Whatever the perception is of politics, you can either just accept it and just say that's the way it is. But the reality is that conventional wisdom is always wrong. It always changes. And people have an influence. I mean, people in Iowa have a chance to to directly influence this process a lot more than any other place. I mean, New Hampshire and Iowa have this status that they take seriously. So there's always big swings towards the end of this. And I believe I can beat Hillary Clinton, which most Republicans want to see happen. And I believe I have the detailed plans to fix the mess. I understand why people are angry, but I think the solution, the antidote to anger is fixing things. Fixing how these broken system, all these things that are broke, how they work. Change the culture in Washington. Mess up break a little bit China. Get the blood flowing again up there. Career civil service reform ought to be a priority. How you procure ought to be a priority. We need term limits. I'm totally for a constitutional convention to have a balanced budget amendment, line item veto power, the things that would allow a president and allow people to believe that government in Washington is back to the business of being a servant rather than our master.
One of the PACs supporting you has run a lot of ads targeting Marco Rubio. Do you see him as your biggest competitor here? Do you support that approach?
I can't control I only have one super PAC supporting it, right? Is there more than one?
Right, yeah, no.
That's news.
Right to rise,
Yeah,
right?
Right to rise. Yeah, I don't know what we don't coordinate. I want to stay, don't want to get into a criminal justice issue, so I'm not gonna coordinate. I'm focused on me. Everybody's gonna be scrutinized. I've probably been scrutinized more just because of the fact that I've been around longer. As governor, Dad was president, my brother was president. My attitude is, might as well just be totally transparent. So I've released 33 years of tax returns and all my emails that the public can see. I think that's the better approach. Marco's attacking Chris Christie. Is anybody wringing their hands about that? I've been attacked. This is actually pretty tame compared to previous elections that I recall. Now, probably we're just warming up here. I mean, there's a lot of dough in the silos, best I can tell. So we'll see. But this is how politics works. It's not beanbag. And if you can't handle this, wait till you get to the general election. You think that's going to be just a little walk in the park? The left wants to maintain their power, and they will do whatever they can to demonize someone. And someone that doesn't have a proven record better get ready. Better gird your loins, as they say.
Do you expect your brother to join you on the campaign trail in the coming weeks?
I don't know. I think he'll do it if he's if it fits his schedule and stuff. He's been a big help. We're working on that right now. I don't know
And working on,
whether he's going to do it or not. That's what I'm saying.
okay.
How confident are you about where you're gonna end up in the Iowa caucuses?
I don't know where I'm going to end up. I'm just working hard. I don't I'm liberated from all this who's winning, who's losing, you know, what the pundits say, you know, conventional wisdom. I'm like 800 years in political years. I'm only 62. I'm pretty vibrant, 62 years. But in political years, like dog years. I've been to this movie so many times. To be honest with you, I know it's important, and your job is to really focus on this. And for some, it's kind of fun. It's not my motivation. I lose interest literally within a half of a sentence. It just doesn't. Because next week it'll be totally different. It's just like, I don't know why people don't see this, but that's just the way it is. I don't disrespect the process, but the process part of it, I just let other people deal with. I'm running because I believe I have the skills to fix things, and we need to fix things in this country for our country to rise up again. And we haven't had one question on foreign policy, which is pretty remarkable, since that's really the dominant question in town hall meetings in Iowa and across the country. People are scared about the lack of the turbulence in the world. It looks like it's been turned upside down there too.
What are they asking you mostly when you're at town halls?
They're asking, what are you going to do about ISIS? What do you think about the Iranian agreement? There's now some of these there's groups, you know, that organize to come to town halls, which I find interesting. There's a group concerned about nuclear proliferation. That question came up today. It's a really important question. And here we have the leading candidate for president on the Republican side, who could not answer, did not have a clue what the nuclear triad was. Didn't have a clue. Wowzer. I mean, think about that. The President of the United States needs to know why it's important to modernize the launch capabilities to create a healthy deterrent. And the President of the United States sure as heck better know why it's important to engage in the world so that we don't have rogue nations with capabilities. And a candidate for President of the United States should not say that China should take care of the North Korean problem and just leave it at that, when the risk for the United States is that they actually are building long-range missile capability to hit California. And they already have some capability as it relates to the bomb. You don't outsource China, and then the same day, by the way, also call for a 45% across-the-board tariff on all Chinese imports that would devastate Iowa and agriculture, because the first retaliation, bam, right here. I mean, it's not a serious kind of advocacy during really scary times for people. So part of my job, and I'm the only guy that seems, everybody else, as I say, is in the witness protection program in this subject, you know, you got to confront Trump on this.
So how do you think you stand out from your opponents in
Well,
terms of how you would deal with ISIS?
Well, first of all, how do I stand out with my opponents as it relates to Trump? Is I'm the only guy taking him on, just for the record. But as it relates to ISIS, which is a more important subject, I laid out a detailed plan at the Reagan Library in August, before the Paris attacks and before the tragedy in San Bernardino, and it called for directly arming the Kurds, which now goes, it's not enough, and it goes through the Iraqi national government, which creates real conflicts. Embedding our troops to train and fortify the Iraqi military. Other countries have done that. This administration expressly prohibits that. Create forward locators, or a more intelligence capability on the ground that can identify the targets that are necessary. We haven't had the strike rates that are effective as we've had in previous efforts in Iraq or Afghanistan. Re-engage with the Sunni tribal leaders, both politically and militarily. They were abandoned after the surge was complete, when the President and Mrs. Clinton kind of fulfilled their campaign commitment. In case of President Obama, Hillary Clinton went to Iraq once as Secretary of State. They squandered this relationship that created a fragile stability in Iraq. We need to re-engage there, because ultimately the Shia militia aren't going to be able to take out ISIS in Iraq. It has to be a Sunni-led effort. And then relieve the military warfighters with this onerous requirement of legal approvals for everything. We're fighting a police law enforcement exercise there rather than a military operation. And warfighting will always adhere to the standards of international warfighting, but we've imposed additional restrictions that I think are inappropriate. As it relates to Syria, a no-fly zone, and a series of safe zones to protect the refugees, but to allow for a unified force, which has been made more difficult because of the perception that we've changed teams. We've kind of moved towards Iran, and that is deeply disconcerting for the Sunni Arab countries and Turkey. They have no confidence the United States is serious anymore, so you have to reestablish that connection to build an army that would ultimately be successful, not just in Iraq, but in...
How do you do that? How do you reestablish that connection and build that credibility?
I think you have to confront Iranian ambitions. There have to be not just symbolic gestures, but real gestures quickly to show that we haven't changed teams. President Obama and his administration would say we haven't, but the Persian Gulf countries certainly think we have, and Egypt thinks we have, and Jordan, here's a good example. When the when the King Abdullah comes to Washington, see him. Maybe that would be a good idea. You know, our strongest, most loyal ally in the region is in Washington, D.C. right now. He's not seeing President Obama. Wow. Don't make it more difficult for al-Sisi. Engage with Egypt, not just to, not to lecture him about human rights violations. Work with him. Make it clear that we're for human rights, for sure, but don't push him away, because Egypt has an important constructive role in this as well. And there just has to be a belief that we're not leaving, that we're there. Not as the policeman. I don't think they want that, but we have to give people a sense that we have their back. And by the way, one of the ways you do that is to re-engage with Israel in a similar kind of fashion, where there's no light between Israel and the United States. Because the Arab world sees our ruptured relationship with Israel, and they say, well, if Israel can't get a good deal from the United States, how are we going to get one? And there's some things that you could do in that regard that I think would be really appropriate to show that diplomatically, politically, and strategically, militarily, that we're going to be engaged in the region.
How do you think your name is viewed internationally on the diplomatic stage, and how that will affect your relationships abroad?
Yeah, so I think it's viewed favorably. I think it's viewed very favorably, actually. I took a trip to Germany and to Poland and to the Baltic countries, and it was. I mean, this is not as much about me, clearly, although I have a reputation of seriousness that crosses the country's borders. I've lived overseas. I've done business overseas. I've traveled overseas extensively. So there is, on my own, I have some sense that people appreciate my views on these things. But my dad and my brother, have relationships and have worked with these leaders, and there's just a lot of respect. You go to Germany right now, we're at the anniversary of the unification of Germany, where, but for George H.W. Bush, it's uncertain whether we would have had a unified West and East. Because the rest of Europe, including Margaret Thatcher and the UK, were very concerned about a empowered Germany for obvious reasons. So I can just tell you that there's a belief that that I have the right stuff, and it's also reflected here in our own country when 30 admirals and generals have endorsed my campaign and provided military advice. Bob Natter is traveling with me today. General Jumper was going to come, but he got sick. He was one of the last Joint Chiefs from the Air Force. So, and 11 Medal of Honor recipients are supporting me. There's just a sense that from day one I would know what to be doing.
On the foreign policy topic, what haven't we asked you that you expected us to ask? Where do you think there are some key areas that you want to draw distinctions between you and your opponents for the nomination?
Well, I mean, one of the big issues is trade. It's not necessarily a military issue, but it's an important issue, and it's tied. So if the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is a good example. If we're to send a signal that we're a serious partner, that we've been that way and we're not leaving, that we're committed, that we're going to rebuild our military, we're not going to shrink our army down to 400,000 troops, 420,000, we're not going to cut in half again our Navy. These are signals that Japan sees and Korea sees, and they wonder whether we're in the game. It's a constant refrain in Asia. Certainly in China, they see this stuff and they take 2 steps forward when we take a step back. And one of the ways to show your support and commitment to the region, which has been a significantly powerful force for peace and security, and for the expansion of trade, the United States Navy has been a guarantor of free trade that has created huge benefits for us and for the world. And by not having it there, it's a serious problem. So this is not just an economic issue, but the rest of the world is wondering whether the United States is serious about leading the world. One of the ways to prove it would be to approve the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which...
If Congress doesn't, what would your plan be?
If Congress doesn't, well, as president, I will fight to. It's not going to happen under the watch of President Obama, I don't believe.
Right.
So it'll still be pending. The Trade Promotion Authority continues, so I'll continue to engage in that regard. I haven't read the agreement, so there's one caveat to this. You know, it's got to be an agreement that doesn't unfairly jeopardize American industry in some fashion that is just totally, wrong. There's nothing I've read about people that have read it that gives people me a sense that I wouldn't support it. But if we don't pass this agreement, then the trading standards, how trade is administered, how intellectual property is viewed, how environmental policy plays out, all of which are always part of how labor elements of trade agreements play out, will be the Chinese way, not the American way. And if we want to be a serious player in the world and lead the world to our benefit, which it does, then we have to prove this to people that now have grave doubts. If you could envision, the Chinese Infrastructure Bank's a good example. We said, no, I can't do that. That's horrible. Every other country just signed right up. We didn't have an alternative. We weren't engaged. No one thought we were serious. And if we don't approve this agreement, the Chinese will basically view that as a surrender, and that they will aggressively pursue their agenda, and these countries that don't have the scale to contend with the massive nature of China will push back. I can tell you that if you're sitting in Southeast Asia and you're watching this debate unfold and you hear the protectionist rhetoric of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, it gives you pause about the United States. So back to your question, I think people view my candidacy overseas in a different way than they view candidates that are trying to reflect the political heat of the moment. Hillary Clinton was for this agreement. I think she started the negotiations for it. But God forbid that she would actually have to do something that goes against some poll that she probably took amongst early primary voters or caucus goers.
What do you think is something that people don't know about you that they should, or a misconception that you wish you could clear up?
Oh, there's probably a lot. One of which is that I'm not a conservative, which is just absolutely ludicrous. I mean, if you think about it, there are people that are running that have really no proven record. I guess they think that gives them advantage to kind of craft their, I don't know, it is what it is, so they don't have a proven record. But of the people on that stage that have a record, no one compares to me as it relates to the consistent conservative record that I have. And apparently that's that's not how it's perceived by some. My duty is to go tell them that I cut taxes every year totaling $19 billion. Florida was a state that got rid of lifetime protections in the career civil service system. You can fire someone for cause, just as you can in the private sector in Florida. We reduced the government workforce by 11%. We took on the trial bar, the teachers union, the public service unions, as I said, and we won. We won big victories. I eliminated affirmative action. Not many people wake up one day and say that's the right thing to do, but it is. It was the right thing to do by eliminating discriminatory policies for one group at the expense of another. We had a leadership model that was race neutral, but ended up creating, during my time, more African Americans and Hispanics attended our universities. Procurement. Most states have set-asides and preferential pricing for minority-owned businesses. We eliminated that and replaced it with a leadership model that turned the 18 bureaucrats that were regulating, so like we had 18 people that would make people fill out all sorts of forms, and they would spend a lot of time figuring out if you were a woman. Well, my attitude was, you're a woman. So my job then, instead of having a regulator, we turned them into marketing officers to identify opportunities in the government, and we expanded triple-digit increases without set-asides, without preferential pricing. That's a conservative approach that no one's ever done. We had the first and the second and the third statewide voucher program in the country. No one's done that. The record is pretty clear that I was consistently a conservative. Now, is my tone angry enough, for the current thinking? I mean, I could probably take it up a notch. I could disparage somebody if you want me to. Does that make you feel better that I'm like insulting somebody? No, I'm not going to do that. This is too important for our country. This is literally our chance to reverse a course that is leading us to decline. I'm not going to insult someone to temporarily advance my cause. I'm just not going to do it. It's totally counterproductive. And it will make it harder to win the general election. Because ultimately, this is not going to be on anybody's resume, nominee. The only way it makes a resume is if you win. That's the important thing.
You spoke earlier.
Yeah, we'll probably need to wrap it up, so.
Good, you guys have given me a lot of time. Or I've given you a lot of time. I can't tell which.
You spoke earlier about how you're not that emotionally invested in the polls and that kind of thing.
No.
And of course, some of your opponents do seem to be emotionally invested in the polls
One
and the
big
size
one.
of their rallies. Do you think that's contributed to this perception that maybe your heart isn't completely in this, that, to use his phrase, you're a low-energy candidate, that kind of thing?
No, I think, Castro used this as well. The Soviets mastered this. It's called the big lie. It's repeating something over and over again and, turning into something that's not true. That's the Trumpian way. Look, there is nothing low energy about me. I got married when I was 21 years old. I graduated from college in 2.5 years. I took 3 months off, so effectively 2 years. And my wedding, thank God for my wife tolerating this, we were married on a Saturday, and on Monday I started work. And I've not stopped working. When I was governor, I worked 16 hours a day, stayed connected with my constituents. I left office with a 67% approval rating as the most conservative Republican in a purple state. So I'm not low energy,
Well,
and I'm totally invested in the campaign. I'm not invested in who's winning and who's losing and who's hitting who, and what about the left-handed Albanian vote? How are you doing there and all that stuff?
Well, I sense you're passionate about public service and governing,
And helping
but maybe
people.
less so on the political.
Yeah, well, that doesn't mean that's not low energy. That's just allocation of,
So,
energy in the smart way. I mean,
Yeah.
what good does it do to fret about a poll where the margin of error is 6% and your X and the polling is done in a way that's really not accurate anyway. I mean, I just don't obsess about that stuff.
Yeah.
so I know that was our final question.
No, that was not really a
I've
question.
got one last question for you. Insults aside, what do you say? So you said there's this misconception that you're not a conservative. What do you say to the comments that have been made that Ted Cruz is the true conservative candidate out there?
Why? So let's send the McKinsey branch of the Martian branch of the McKinsey, the greatest consulting firm. Which one do you guys use? You're the one that pays for it. So use McKinsey to try to figure out business practices, whatever the smart consulting firm is. Sure. Pick it from the furthest way of their constellation of offices, which means that's the smartest group, right? That come in, the furthest expert. And you would put my record against Ted Cruz's record, and why would you assume that he's the most conservative? I'm just talking reality here. I think the Martian McKinsey consultant, once he overcame the fact that this is a really weird political process and had to go through all that, once they established that with the rules of engagement, we said that I'm the most conservative because I haven't talked about it. And my views haven't changed. And my first impulse is to cut taxes and reform the things that are broken, and to reduce the government workforce and create a climate where the private sector workforce grows, to revolutionize the things that are broken so that we can have people rise up. I mean, on the Second Amendment, what has Ted Cruz done on the Second Amendment to protect gun rights? Florida has 1.5 million concealed carry weapon permit holders. We have strong laws against people that use guns in the commission of crimes, probably the strongest in the country. We've reduced gun violence dramatically, but we're probably the most, or if not the most, close to the most pro-Second Amendment state in the country. What's Ted Cruz done? I mean, the guy is talented and he's gifted, but what's his record? I don't know what it is. He has a view on it. Pro-life? Does anybody on that stage have a consistent record of protecting the rights of the unborn or the frail elders, or a belief that life from beginning to end is important to protect, that we should err on the side of life? Has anybody on that stage gone through the Terry Schiavo issue the way that I did? Has anybody on that stage gotten a legislature to fund with state monies $2 million a year for crisis pregnancy centers, or eliminated partial birth abortion procedures from the state, or began to defunded Planned Parenthood? Ted Cruz talks about it, and he does it, as I said, quite eloquently. He's a really smart, talented, gifted guy. But where's the record? I mean, look, I'm just saying, as they say. I'm just saying, man. I mean, you look at the record, the reality of the record of each one of these candidates, as gifted as they are, no one has that record. The governors that are left, no one has that record. And the senators who were forced, unfortunately, in the age of Obama, basically to be backbenchers, arguing about filing amendments and calling it success. I mean, literally, they have these arcane discussions on the debate stage. It's like people are looking at, well, so let me get this straight. You, Senator Cruz and Senator Rubio, you're arguing over who sponsored an amendment to a bill that didn't pass. It's like, come on, man. That's not governance. That's yapping. So this is the opportunity, is for people to understand that this is not about talking anymore. We don't have the luxury of talking. We need a doer. And a doer not just to reflect the here and now and how people think, but has thought it through, that has a clear view and persuades people towards our cause rather than pushes them away. That's the plan.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
very much for your
Thank you.
comments.